We're here with Giff Constable. Giff, thank you very much for doing this interview with me today.
Thanks, Tom.
And I'm always using my teleprompter, so excuse me, but I can't remember all the questions. I'm hearing from many people in the UX field that it's very hard to work with startups.
Right.
And the reason I hear for that is that they know everything,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't need anyone. What are your thoughts about this?
So founders come in all shapes and sizes, just like any other colleague or
Mhm.
boss, right? And there are easy ones to work with and difficult ones to work with. You know, the best founders, in my opinion, find a way to balance confidence and stubbornness, because you need both, with humility, right? With this urge to question and to find the opportunity. There are dictators out there. There are people that are lost in their own vision. But oftentimes I think that's not a very effective way to be. They can get lucky, but usually it's not an effective way to be an entrepreneur. And it's a very hard way to lead people and have really talented people join your team. So there are pressures on the founder that force them to put up a facade at times. And when you're dealing with venture capital, you have to just exert the sheer force of will to bring this thing into existence, because there's so much gravity against every idea, every new idea. And that can trigger people to take it too far.
Mhm.
That is true. But it's funny, when you pose that question, it puzzled me, because a lot of the best entrepreneurs I know aren't like that at all, actually. They're asking questions all the time. Now, I will say this, right? If you're a UX person, there's two areas where you might want to be cautious. One is a first-time founder, right? A first-time founder has not learned some of the hard lessons about how this stuff works. The other one is actually a second-time founder who was successful the first time.
All right,
Sometimes the most dangerous, actually, of all, because yes, then they just take the old playbook and they think they're going to repeat it, and it oftentimes doesn't work. There's kind of a joke that's the most dangerous kind of entrepreneur is the one who got lucky the first time, and usually it's a combination of luck and hard work. But so you gotta choose your bosses wisely. But I don't think that's a fair statement to make as a sweeping rule.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Many startup founders start their companies based on a personal experience they were having, and then they obsess about finding and developing the solution to that experience. In your opinion, what needs to be done to make founders first obsess about the problem they're trying to solve?
Well, hopefully, they are actually founding it. Starting a company based on something they've personally felt or acutely observed, rather than, oh, this would be a cool idea. Those are often harder to make right. They can work. There's no rules to this stuff, but they're harder. Now, people, both entrepreneurs and designers, fall in love with their solutions, and it's easy to do. And we also fall prey to this notion that other people use technology and experience problems the same way we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I like Lean Startup and I like user experience best practices out there is not that it's a rule set, but it's actually a set of framework and a set of guidelines to keep myself honest. And so I use that as a sounding board, and I surround myself with people as well who ask those kinds of tough questions to make sure you're grounding. Now, I think it's changing in the environment right now. It helps that you have folks like Dave McClure who sit out there and they shout in colorful language, I don't care about your features, what problem are you solving? And hearing that, I think, helps young, newer entrepreneurs realize that, okay, I need to reframe how I'm thinking this. And then the other vector is all this lean startup stuff, which a lot of people are talking about. There's fewer people doing yet, but it's starting to change, and it's really hard to do. It's easy to talk about, but that is changing, I think, how people are approaching things.
In terms of user experience research, which is what I do, the change I saw is the new audience that we now have. I mean, many of the things that the Lean Startup approach is calling for were being done and said
Absolutely.
Many decades ago.
Yeah.
And but nobody listened.
Right.
And now a new audience is listening.
Yeah.
And it has opened the door for UX people and for startup founders to be more open to learning from their potential customers.
I agree with
So
that. The tech world to me is a bit like some parts of Brooklyn, where in Brooklyn you have the hipsters here and the Orthodox Jews here and the Puerto Ricans over here, and they all live right next to each other. They're talking totally different languages, and it's really cool when they get together. And so we have user experience, and you have your startup founders, and you have your engineering group over here, and the biz dev folks.
I'm not going to ask who's who.
Yeah, but no, but half of it is understanding how to talk in someone else's language.
Yeah.
So if an entrepreneur hears contextual inquiry, right, their eyes roll in the back of their head and they go, "Give me a break!" Right? You got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
But there's meaning there. It's just a question of how you frame it. So Eric Ries what's been particularly impressive about what Eric Ries has done is that he's created both in terms of what he said and how he's marketed it, to be honest with you, is that he's created a common language for business people and designers and engineers to start speaking. And each actually, in its own roles, was working on similar things. But now we're all talking together. And now we're feeding off of each other and working together much better. I mean, like our goal, the ideal way you create product today is not silos, handing down requirements and then doing design and then doing the engineering, but actually working together in small cross-functional problem-focused teams. And I think that Lean Startup is built on what came before and is helping that movement a lot.
I observe that many startup founders now understand it's important to learn from their customers or potential customers, yet when they do their, and I'm using that on purpose, quote unquote, customer development interviews, they ask all the wrong questions. So what happens usually is that they describe their idea and then ask for three things. They ask for feedback, what do you think about it? They ask, would you use it? And they ask, how much would you pay for it? And what are your thoughts on this? How can this be changed, if it needs to be changed at all?
Well, it does need to be changed, that's for sure. But there's balance to be had. You can learn a lot by trying to sell. But when you try to sell, you're not learning some things that are really important as well. And you need to do both. It's not linear necessarily. It can be worth doing both. Human beings stink at predicting the future, especially about themselves, right? The trouble that entrepreneurs have is that they are so excited about this thing that they've uncovered, this insight that they believe they have, that they become their own reality distortion field. They become their own worst enemy to a certain extent. You need that to, as I say, to break through the gravity, the friction, to create something new. It's hard because people are saying that you're an idiot. People are saying this is totally wrong. And you have to be able to push through that. But you've got to be able to question yourself. With that honesty should come a hunger to learn how to do this stuff better. I think it is happening. I think just as we saw entrepreneurs become more educated in how you do term sheets and how you work with venture capitalists, we're seeing now entrepreneurs realizing that, okay, how do I become better product people? How do I ask questions? How do I learn? Rather than just focus on growth. There's now more of an emphasis on learning. It's a mental switch. It's a hard mental switch. But I do believe it's happening, and it needs to go further. I agree with it. I agree with you.
All right. Now let's talk about the UX community. I think the whole idea of inviting you for an interview started with some kind of an argument I had with some other people in my field that you were witnessing, and it happened online a few months back. So how can the UX community think more holistically across problem, solution, business model, customer acquisition, etc.?
So the answer is really simple. They have to want to,
Okay.
right? UX people by nature are learners, right? And they're empathic. But you choose what is valuable, right? So to me, it's a mental switch. The old method, or not a method, but the old thought process that some parts of the UX community bought into was this notion that we have to defend the customer against the business, which is a false battle. It's absolutely wrong, right? You are there to align the customer and the business. That's a huge part of what UX needs to do. And so I often use this phrase, little design versus big design. And little design is, most people think that design is just what color is the wallpaper, what font did you use? And that's annoying to those of us who think that design is more than that. I ascribe more to the Steve Jobs version of design, which is, how does this work? Why does this work? These are big questions we need to figure out. So you're a product designer. If you're a product designer, you should feel responsible for everything. Because in a product company, it is the center of everything. Everything touches it. Customer acquisition, the numbers, everything touches. Customer service touches the product, and the product can help it or it can hurt it. Now, a UX person shouldn't feel like they have to do everything. They don't even have to be experts in everything, but they have to be empathic about these other things, and they have to understand the language and the motivations of these other things so that they can help them and they can steer them and they can communicate effectively so that everyone's aligned and working towards the right goal. And I think that a user experience person is at a really critical juncture point to make things happen. A product manager too, but the more senior you get, frankly, UX and product management, that Venn diagram of responsibilities really starts to overlap. So yeah, you have to think about the whole. It's just a mental switch. Do you value these things? If you value them, if you see why they're important, UX people have all the skills they need to learn them. It's just a mental switch.
All right. Is there anything you want to ask me?
That's a good question. How do you think entrepreneurs should approach research? That word research can be poisonous at times within the entrepreneurial community because you end up thinking you need to be so action-oriented and it feels like analysis paralysis. So and those are extremes, right? These are misunderstandings.
It happens.
So what do you think, what's your advice?
First of all, I know that the word research is problematic. I don't have a good word to replace it, but it's problematic because of the associations people have with it, academic research or something like that. I don't know, white robes and things like that. What I try to do in every research that I'm involved in, and I highly recommend that to anyone who's doing anything to learn from others, is to specify really clearly for myself first what questions I'm trying to answer by the end of this thing. Because the thing that happens in almost every research activity that you do is, even if you have that questions, that question or questions, you learn so many other things that are relevant and interesting, but they might confuse you, overwhelm you, and direct you out of the pave that you're really interested in to make progress. So I always ask others who are my stakeholders for research, and I encourage startup founders to ask themselves, what decision are you trying to make based on the results from this study?
Right.
So if you answer this question, if you define very clearly what questions you're trying to answer by the end of this thing, whatever it is, whatever we call it, then it's going to be very easy to stay focused, both in the data collection stage and in the analysis. Because I always like to say, and it's true, when I present results to whomever it is, when they say to me that it's interesting, that's the biggest insult to me. I don't want my research to be interesting. I want it to be actionable. I want people to be able to do something about it. So that's why I'm asking in advance, what are the questions we're trying, I'm helping, form these questions. So that would be the first thing. The other recommendation, we talked about it earlier, is to just obsess about the problem first. Just go out to the world. It doesn't have to be physically out, but it might be. Go out and watch what people do today, what problems they have and how they solve them today. I talk with a lot of founders, and some of them, I get the impression that if they develop an app for whatever that people use on their free time, when they look at competition, for example, they look at other apps that do similar things. And I always try to tell them, competition is free time, what people do in their free time. So you need to look at that. You're not going to be able to find that if you don't go out to the world and learn about that. Not about your product. It's your product as much as it's not, pleasant to hear. Your product is not interesting. The problem, obsessing about the problem, is more interesting and important at early stages, because, you can have a good or bad team, but you can develop a good product if you really want to. It's not hard to develop good, well-designed product. It's a lot of effort, but it's doable. I think it's a lot harder to develop the right products and the products that solve problems. Some people say, okay, we found the problem. It's not enough. You need to solve problems that people really care about. Because I can tell you, just thinking about my house, I have tons of problems that I really want to solve, but I'm not because I don't care about them that much. The garage door, I can handle it. I can lift it up manually. It's not. It's not something that I would waste. I don't know what time to fix it. So I need to care. So these answers are not, as Steve Blank likes to say, are not in the building. So you have to go out and learn from people.
Yeah, when I'm talking to people about customer development, and Steve Blank was very smart to brand it customer development, not research, but I really encourage folks to focus on behavior and hearing stories about how people have hit the problem, how they tried to solve it before, these kinds of things, rather than speculation about the future. Because speculation, as you know, is really dangerous territory. One of the things that I like to do when I'm going into qualitative research mode is to set goals ahead of time. Is to actually start by saying, I want to see 70% of the people I talk to answer in this way, or I want to see that they feel this acute pain X percentage of the time. And that percentage is oftentimes a guess. You try to make it an educated guess. But I like going in with that number, because my logic is that it keeps you honest on the other side. So you don't then reinterpret what you just learned to fit the way you want the world.
You have to set the number
beforehand. So you agree with that approach?
Yes,
okay,
definitely.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you decide on a number after you talk with people. You don't know the final number, but you decide after you talk before the analysis. So that's not fair. It doesn't keep you honest. Cool. So my last explosive question to you is, when should a startup hire their first UX person? In your opinion?
Well, this I also think is a no-brainer, because I think you need to have a UX person on your founding team, but it doesn't have to be a UX person, if you know what I mean. It's someone who cares about user experience, someone who wants to learn about how the user experience community approaches things, solves problems, and has a skill set to be a UX maker. If you're in software, well, actually probably anything, but you need that person on the team. It's critical, and it's only becoming more critical. Yeah, so I think it can be dangerous. I do believe that startups, in most cases, sometimes you need a specialist with particular domain experience because of the problem you're trying to solve. But in most cases, you need generalists on your team. And you need very action-oriented and very practical people as well, but people that are multi-skilled. And so would I recommend that someone go hire a PhD in HCI? I'm not sure that that person is best suited for a startup team. That's a blanket statement, and some of them probably are, but in general, sometimes it's get a little bit too dogmatic, a little bit too cocky about your heuristics, a little bit too into the research has to be bulletproof, I need statistical significance, all this kind of stuff, which a startup just can't afford. But I do think that you need to have someone who has that mindset. I think it's really important. But that person, it's the same thing. Every product needs a product owner, is something I believe. But that doesn't have to be a particular kind of person. It's someone who wants to take responsibility for the project and act as the lead. Not a dictator, but act as the lead, right? And the same thing, someone needs to feel responsible for user experience. Now what happened with me is that my background's pretty weird. I started in the business side, I moved over into the product side. I guess you would call me more of a product manager. And then, quite a few years back, I started seeing, like, what is this UX thing, right? It's, okay, you guys have names for these things that we just do, and you actually do them really seriously. And so I started reading about it, and I started meeting folks in it, and trying to get mentored by people who do it, and picking up all sorts of tricks as to how people approach customer development and dump and sort and design studios, and all these things are really useful. There's so much rich things for entrepreneurs and product people who don't think of themselves as UX people to learn from and use. So really at the end of the day, as an entrepreneurial type, right, it's just getting stuff done. That's what matters. And so have someone who cares about it, is willing to learn about it, and will go do it. That's what matters. And you need that early. You need that right away.
All right, cool. I think these are all of my questions.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.